the recording. Welcome everyone for this episode of Convert to QuickBooks Pro, a webinar about converting and importing financial data for QuickBooks. Today is July 19, 2017, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You may be watching this live or you may watch this later on in a recorded session in YouTube. Today's content, I'll speak briefly about me, the presenter. I'll talk about the tools that are out there to import data into QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online. So we'll talk about both versions of QuickBooks. Then we'll discuss bank feeds, which is, in my opinion, the most powerful way of working, importing bank data into QuickBooks Online. And we'll talk about some of the different options you have there. Then we'll talk about what do you do with the transactions and download from the bank. Sometimes you can download them in QBO format. Sometimes you download them in CSV format. Sometimes in PDF format. So we'll talk about the different formats. And then lastly, I'll do a demonstration on one of my favorite tools out there called To QBO Convert Pro. Just go to toQuickBooks.com to check that out. We'll do a demo a little bit later on. Okay, about myself, I'm an accountant and a QuickBooks consultant. I'm in the Miami area and my email is hector@garciacpa.com. If you have any questions about converting data into QuickBooks or different data formats, what works, what doesn't work, go ahead and email me. I'm usually pretty good at answering those emails. Okay, so let's talk about why import data. So these are what we'll call the scenarios or circumstances in which we will need to import data into QuickBooks, and everyone is likely to have a different reason or circumstance why they would need to do that. But in some cases, we want to transfer historical information from another accounting system, another ERP system into QuickBooks. That's definitely one of the reasons why you want to approach or learn data import. In other cases, you want to import a list, so a list of customers, a list of vendors, a list of items, the chart of accounts, that sort of thing. In other cases, we want to transfer a list from one QuickBooks file to another QuickBooks file. So that's another reason to do data import. In some cases, we want to take a massive amount of, let's say, item data and do price changes, maybe in Excel, or maybe a description change or something like that, or a name change in Excel, and then paste it back into QuickBooks Desktop. And in some cases, we want to import transactions that we maybe download from, again, another accounting system, or maybe a web ordering system or something like that. And you would have to import sales orders, invoices, purchase orders, that sort of thing. And then last, and possibly the most common one, is we want to import our bank data, because our banks do a pretty good job at containing 90 to 95% of the data that gets reported on a tax return or a financial statement. And the bank contains really useful information like a date, description of the payee if it was an electronic transaction, the amount, and that sort of thing. So we're going to have most of our focus for this episode will be on the bank and credit card data. Now we'll focus some other episode on working on something else, okay? On working on invoices and stuff like that. That will be a different episode. We'll discuss that. Today we'll focus 100% on bank data because it's the number one question or request that I get via email. Now let's start with some of the built-in methods inside QuickBooks Desktop. So we're talking about QuickBooks Pro, Premier, Accountant, Enterprise, not online, by the way. That slide was supposed to say not online, not necessarily not only. So that was supposed to say not online. So online doesn't have this feature we're about to show you, which is called the Add, Edit, Multiple List, which is awesome. That will be the first demo I'll do. I'll do it on this one, and I'm going to show you how to import vendors in a massive way into QuickBooks Desktop using the bank data that comes from your bank statement. Okay, so that's going to be the first demo I'll do, which is called Add, Edit. Just for now, just know this is only available on the desktop version, Pro, Premier, Accountant, Enterprise, or online, or Enterprise, not online. Then we have batch enter transactions, which I'll demonstrate right after. Batch enter transactions is only available in Accountant or Enterprise editions. And this is a copy and paste style It works almost identical to add edit, but it's limited to checks, deposits, invoices, credit memos, bills, and bill credits. So as of now, as of QuickBooks 2017, those are the only transactions that you can import via Excel, copy and paste using built-in methods. Okay, so we'll do a demonstration of that. And then if you need anything beyond that, so for example, if you're working